I'm here talking to you today. I'm also in the health disparities training program, so I've gotten accustomed to people looking at me funny like, why is the business guy here? What is this all about? But although I'm in the School of Business, a lot of the theories and the phenomenon that I study has a lot of overlaps with what your social and behavioral sciences and also your psychology study. I just study it typically in the employee or organizational context. So today, Penny told me that the theme of this month is expanding the research team. So I'm taking one of my papers that's forthcoming in the Journal of Organizational Behavior. That's one of the top journals in my field. It's a study that we performed on 107 software implementation teams. And so what we looked at is this phenomenon called transactive memory systems. Transactive memory, we'll kind of get into it in the presentation, but it's a group level phenomenon that actually has implications for hopefully what you guys do today. Now, normally I would ask everybody to go around the room, introduce themselves, and tell me what you do, because for me, I am learning more about the health and the academic medical enterprise. Primarily, my background has been in business. I have been in life insurance sales. I've been a serial entrepreneur. I worked as an engineer for AT&T for 10 years before I decided that I wanted to sell everything I had and go back to school and get finished.
But you're only 25.
I am deceptively young. My voice good looks will throw you off. But actually, I will be 40. Usually my students say, "Oh my God, you're so old."
You're like.
All right, so I guess I need to make sure this things up. So what we're going to do, I'm going to kind of go through a few of my slides, just kind of set the tone for what we're going to be talking about, and then I'm going to kind of sit down and we'll just kind of try to make it as interactive as possible, as much as we can do within an hour long session. So I'll definitely get you guys out of here about 1:30. If you have any questions after that, then I will definitely stick around for us to talk. Before I start, does anybody have any specific questions that you definitely want answered before we begin? I always like to talk. Some people say, yeah, I hate my boss. All right. All right, so I've kind of already gone over the agenda. These are the objectives. So let me ask this. Typically, when I come to a session like this, I usually have people say, typically I get here like 20 to 30 minutes early. I really underestimated traffic and parking. I don't know why I did that. I guess a lot of times when I come, it's like 8 o'clock in the morning. You usually don't come around lunchtime. So I usually get here early, and somebody will always come to me like, yeah, I'm here, but I really don't work in tickets. And I say, oh, really? I usually ask them a couple of questions like, well, you work in a lab? And a lot of times they say, yeah, I work in a lab. Are there people in your lab? Yeah. Do you work for, somebody that runs the lab? Yeah, there's a senior lab person. Are there postdocs and other students in the lab? Yeah. Are you guys co-authoring any papers together? Sure. Yeah, we are. Working on some grants and everything. Just got one fun. That's a team. So one of the slides, and I'll kind of jump ahead. What is a team? So this report, there's a report that came out earlier this year. It was produced by the National Academies Press. It was actually commissioned by the NIH, the NSF, and a lot of the major federal granting organizations. And so they wanted to do pretty much a systematic review of what do we know about teams pretty much in all fields. And although this area of team science is relatively new to the academic medical enterprise, we've been studying teams in business for over 50 years. 5 decades, we have 5 decades worth of research on interpersonal relationships, teams, team performance. So the definition that they use in this particular report, the report is called Enhancing the Effectiveness of Team Science. I want to make sure that you guys get electronic copies of these slides. But they define a team as 2 or more individuals with different roles and responsibilities who interact socially and interdependently within an organizational system to perform tasks and accomplish common goals. And I would dare say that most of us in this room, based on this definition, we are working in teams. If you work with one other individual and their defined roles and responsibilities, and there's interdependence. When we say interdependence is I can't get my work done until you get your work done, or vice versa. So one person's output provides another person's input. And so that makes us intricately linked in order to get our work done. And then we interact socially. And so we engage in what we call transactions. Transactions mean we actually have to talk to each other. Maybe we have to do a handoff, whether that's a virtual handoff or it's a physical handoff. It may be getting a chart to somebody else. It may be sending over some data analysis to another person. But that's the interdependence. And we also have to have these shared goals. These shared goals may be, patient safety. It may be getting a grant. It may be getting that publication. But it's these common goals. So what is team science? So taking that same concept of a team, and that's generally speaking, but put into a scientific context, team science is a collaborative effort to address a scientific challenge that leverages the strengths and expertise of professionals trained in different fields. And so one of the recognitions that our federal agencies are having is that if we want to really advance the translation of science from the bench into the field, into population health, into global health, that's going to require people working across interdisciplinary silos. And not just, I'm a business guy, so I, work on a grant or study with somebody that's in marketing and HR and finance. That's somewhat interdisciplinary. But what does it look like when a business researcher interacts with an engineer, with a biomedical person, with a cancer researcher, with somebody that does biostats, and somebody that does community-based participatory research, all at the same time? And we're all speaking different languages, and we're all motivated differently. Our institutions incentivize us differently. Over the school of business, there's no expectation for me to get a grant in order to get tenure. My tenure is primarily based on getting my papers published in peer-reviewed journals. If I never get a grant, in my career, I can still have a really good career. So if I'm interacting with somebody on the health side of campus, it's important to know what my motivation and my incentives are for participating in some type of collaboratory effort. And vice versa, you guys might be saying, hey, we got to get this grant. I need to fund my students or my postdoc. So it's important to understand these different motivations, particularly if you're doing community-based research. You may be dealing with a pastor of a church. Are they interested in grants or publications? No, they may be interested in maybe funds coming into their community or increasing the health of their members. So these are things that we need to keep in mind when we're trying to engage in collaborative efforts. So current trends in scientific research. Again, this comes from this 260-page report. 90% of all science and engineering publications are by 2 or more authors. And that's in stark contrast to a few decades ago when, it was very common to have single author publications. But now, it's just hard. Max Michael, the dean of public health, he always says that all the easy questions have been answered. Only thing that's left is these wicked problems, these persistently challenging questions that require people to bring expertise from different fields and combine them in a very novel way in order to enhance scientific discovery and implementation. Most publications now are authored by 6 to 10 researchers, and not just in one institution, but across multiple institutions. So how many of you guys are working with somebody that's outside of UAB on grant publication or something? Raise your hand. Yeah. Anybody working with somebody outside of the country? Okay, so that's becoming a lot more common. We're working with people across time zones and across geographical boundaries. That increases the complexity of what we already do, which is already complex. It's already difficult. But when we add that extra layer of complexity, it enhances the reason why we need to make sure that we understand how to work together in teams and to build really good teams. And also the size of our teams continue to increase. So not just from 2 to 6 to 10 people, but I read some of you guys' publications and I see 15, 20, 25 people on publication. Who did what on the publication? So again, when you're having to coordinate with that many people, it increases the difficulties as it relates to working with teams. Okay, so some of the challenges, and I've kind of hinted to some of this, is membership diversity. When you're dealing with people from different expertise backgrounds, from different trainings, they use different lingo and terminology, that creates a challenge for working together collaboratively. And also, we have these different levels of expertise. How do we integrate them? And integrate them in a very deep way, not just a surface level integration, but really at a deep level. How do we integrate science and business and engineering and healthcare and biostatistics and community insights. How do we really integrate those things in order to create something novel and useful? Large size, misaligned goals, and these permeable boundaries. So again, I'm a researcher and I study things like stress and conflict amongst individuals. Those same things are being studied by people that's in public health, that's in health administration, that's in psychology. And so now we have these permeable boundaries where I can take my concepts and play in somebody else's sandbox. But oftentimes, doing that doesn't translate well. And so, we may be talking about the same phenomenon, but again, using different language to do that. That creates confusion sometimes. When we talk about geographic dispersion and then high task indicators. So, some of the recommendations that were made in this report spoke about if we want to really advance the scientific enterprise and really impact human health, community health, and global health, we need to pay attention to a lot of different dynamics. And again, these are things that we've been studying for a while over in the organizational sciences. The team mental models. Team mental model is just making sure everybody's on the same page. Okay? Each one of us has a mental model of how to get our work done. We all have a mental model of what expertise is needed, what tasks need to be done, and who needs to do what. That's a mental model. And you could have 3 or 4 people working on the same project and have different mental models. And when people are operating with different understandings of what needs to be done and how and when, that causes confusion. Transactive memory systems is something that's very related to team mental models. It goes the extra step to talk about things like trust. Like how well do we trust other people's expertise within our team? So you may look at me and say, okay, he got a degree from the University of Alabama. He studied under, Johnson, and Johnson was an expert in X. Therefore, Anthony must be an expert in X. Until you talk to me and find out you don't know jack about X. Has anybody experienced that where you look at somebody's CV or their resume or because of where they went to school and you make the assumption that they have expertise in a particular field until you find out they don't really have that expertise. It doesn't mean that they're not smart, it just means that maybe their expertise is in a different domain. And so until we really start engaging in very good dialogue, sometimes debate, sometimes conflict, and sometimes we have to challenge each other in order to get a really good understanding of what a person's expertise is. And when we do that, then we can update our mental model in order to perform more effectively. Cognitive team interaction, I'll skip over that. Team climate. Team climate is important. When you think about things like climate and culture, what's the climate of your organization or your department or your lab? Those things have an impact on your ability to join a team or to invite other people on a team. I won't ask you to raise your hand. Will anybody ever work for somebody that's just kind of protective of their work? And you say, well, hey, I think we need to bring in Dr. Such and Such to work on this project. And they're kind of like, no, I don't want anybody else touching my stuff. So that creates a climate in which, you may be reticent to try to add somebody onto the team. We're going back to the theme of what we're talking about today, is expanding the research team. Psychological safety. Anybody ever heard of this concept? Psychological safety. Psychological safety has been studied a lot in the health literature. Psychological safety is this feeling or this understanding of people that work in an environment that their work environment is safe for risk-taking, for speaking up when they see things that may be going wrong that may have an impact on patient safety. How many nurses sees another nurse or another doctor that's doing some type of workaround that can endanger the safety of a patient? But because of the norms of the climate within an organization, they may not feel comfortable speaking up to that senior physician or that senior nurse. And so they let it go. And then it compromises the health of the patient. It may compromise the hospital and open the hospital up to liabilities and other legal ramifications. So it's important for us to create an environment that's psychologically safe for people to speak up, for people to have a difference of opinion and not take it personally. And so another thing that we're going to talk about is conflict. Not all conflict is the same. So in my dissertation, I looked at 3 forms of conflict. Conflict can either be task-based, relationship-based, or process-based. Task conflict is just difference of opinion over ideas, strategies, or things like that. Versus relationship conflicts that we may just have some fundamental disagreements over politics, religion, personality clashes. Those are things that if you're not careful, you will misinterpret task conflict for relationship conflict or vice versa. So, if Penny doesn't like me and we have a relationship conflict, then maybe anytime I bring up an idea, she shoots my idea down. Not because it's a bad idea, because she doesn't like me. I'm not going to ask how many times you've seen that in your organization, but I would assume that those type of dynamics are occurring probably in your work environment now or the previous work environment. Things like team cohesion. How do we create an environment where people like being around each other, where people want to socialize and interact outside of the department, go to lunch together and things like that. Those have an impact on our ability to have effective teams. So what I'm going to focus on now, so you see here I have these words in bold. Those are the things that I'm going to focus on for the rest of the presentation. This idea of transactive memory, team climate, and psychological safety. This is based on the work that I have forthcoming in the Journal of Organizational Behavior. So, I don't know what slide is this on? What page is this on? 2. Okay. Page 2 at the bottom. So, transactive memory. Transactive memory is defined at the individual level as memory that is influenced by the knowledge of the memory system of another person. Okay. So, a gentleman named Daniel Wagner, he was a researcher at Harvard University back in the 1980s. He was studying the memory processes of dyads. So he was doing lab experiments where he would bring in, married couples or people that were in a, significant emotional relationship versus pairs of strangers. And so he would give them these memory tests. Give them a whole slate of words and give them to the couples versus the strangers. Give them the words, tell them to memorize them, split them up, and then see how many words that they will recall. Invariably, the married couples always remember more words than the pairs of strangers do. Anybody want to guess why? Take a shot.
Because they did it as a team.
Did it as a team? Okay.
They remind each other.
They
remind each other.
Remind each other? Yeah. So what he came up with is this theory of transactive memory, which suggests that I know what my wife is likely to know and what my wife is likely to remember. And vice versa, she knows what I'm likely to know and what I'm likely to remember. And so because of that, I'm more likely to focus on the words that I know that she's probably going to forget. And vice versa. And so collectively, we can remember more things together than we can individually. Okay? So it's this division of labor, what we call a division of cognitive labor. So, how many of you guys are involved with somebody that can't remember anybody's birthday, but they remember where the stamps and envelopes are? And vice versa, there's somebody that's really good at numbers and really good at birthdays, but they couldn't tell you where anything is in the house. And so we find that kind of phenomenon in like married couples or people, in these emotional relationships. And so if it was just based on one person, nobody ever get a birthday card, right? Because they either forget what stamp envelopes are or they forget the person's birthday. But collectively, if we coordinate our memories, then we can make sure that we get all of our tasks done. So this is this theory of transactive memory that Daniel Wagner developed in the 1980s. And so now we've started to look at transactive memory systems at the team level. And so all of us are working with people within our teams, and so I'm more likely to focus on what I know best and let other people within my team focus on what they do best. And so if I encounter a piece of information that I think you're going to facilitate its storage and retrieval in your memory better than I can, then rather than me spending my cognitive resources trying to remember it, I just pass it off to the person that's more likely and more equipped to remember that information. And so that's what we do in our teams. I don't need to know biostats if I have a biostats person on my team, right? I don't need to know community-based statistical research and the principles behind it if I have somebody that's accustomed to going out to the black belt and building these coalitions of people, in neighborhoods. And so because of that, that has an impact on what I'm likely to remember. So that's what transactive memory is. My memory is impacted by what I perceive to be in the memory of other people that's in my environment. Okay, so this is a phenomenon that we've been studying as been kind of picking up steam in the applied psychology literature. So what makes it transactive? Transactive means that I may have stuff stored in my memory, and my memory is influenced by other people's memory, but we have to engage in these transactions. We actually have to talk, communicate, and pass information back and forth in order to make the system work. It's not enough for us to have the information, but we have to engage in these transactions in order to perform well as a team. All right, so I'm going to talk about an example. I kind of brought up this community-based participatory research a couple of times. So my wife and I entered the CHIA Award program. You guys familiar with CHIA? The Community Health Innovation Award program is sponsored by the CCTS and the One Great Community division of the CCTS, along with, I think, the School of Public Health. So each year, it's essentially a business plan competition where they invite people at UAB or in the community, if they have an innovative idea of how they can impact their community, you submit the idea, you go through this process of they have training and workshops and things like that. You develop a business model or a business pitch, and there's a judging criteria, and you compete for funding. And so back in 2013, my wife and I entered this program, and so the idea that we had was we live in the Bush Hills community. Bush Hills community is over near Birmingham Southern College, right off Arkadelphia Road. And so it's one of our, used to be a really, really nice neighborhood. It was started being built in late 1920s, early 1930s. So a lot of the houses in that neighborhood kind of remind you of the houses maybe over in Norwood and Crestwood and over near Forest Park. But I think a lot of the same builders built those houses. But in the 70s, a lot of people who were the original inhabitants of those homes, they moved out to the suburbs. You had what we call white flight, where you had middle class, upper class people move over the mountain, and then now you have a neighborhood that is predominantly lower middle class people that live in the neighborhood. So beautiful houses over in the neighborhood. Most people keep their houses up. But what we noticed, we were entertaining in our house and we invite people to come over and stuff like that. People are like, oh, I love this neighborhood. I would love to live here. They would get from the real estate agent. And the real estate agent say, well, there are 5 houses on the market. They'll show them all 5, and none of them meet the criteria. So they say, hey, I would love to be your neighbor, but can't find a house. My wife was like, yeah, there are a lot of empty houses in this neighborhood. But we suppose and hypothesize that most of these houses that are not on the market are still vacant and abandoned. So our idea was somebody needs to create a database of every house in the neighborhood and catalog whether the house is vacant, abandoned, or occupied. It was just a simple idea. And so our neighborhood, Bush Hills, is one of 99 neighborhoods in the city of Birmingham. So our idea was, if we can do this for our one neighborhood and develop a model for how we can do this, then it could be something we can spread to the other 98 neighborhoods in Birmingham. So we entered the competition, and we were awarded $15,000 to launch this initiative, later called Inhabit Bush Hills. And so my wife and I put on our tennis shoes, and we walked every block in our neighborhood. It's about 22 miles, 1,300 properties, and we identified over 200 houses that were vacant.
Wow.
Over 200 houses that were vacant. A lot of them were well maintained, but a lot of them weren't. But people were still keeping up with the houses, but a lot of the houses were inheritance properties. So we would go down to the courthouse, we started putting on courthouse records, and the people who owned the house were in Texas, New York, California, Georgia. Some of the people who owned the properties were LLCs and churches and things like that. The houses were just sitting there. And so by me being in the Health Disparities Training Program, I started understanding, these social determinants of health, how your zip code may have more explanatory variance over your health than, your genetic background, your biology, and things like that. And so now what I'm trying to struggle with is now that we've collected all this data and we've got a lot of media attention, actually Fox 6 did a story on us last week. We got all this media attention, but the other side is I still don't get tenure, right? That's important to me. That $15,000 was gone a long time ago. Okay, so I have a wife and 2 kids. So if I want to keep my job at UAB, I need to make sure that I can take what I'm doing from a community standpoint, because that's important. That's important to me. It doesn't necessarily fall cleanly in my roles and responsibilities as a professor at UAB. But how can I make that so? How can I take this? We have a Venn diagram here, these 3 concentric circles. How do I make sure that what I'm doing in the community is also research? It's also something I can bring into the classroom. It's also something that fills my community service, my outreach obligations as a professor at UAB. So now I'm trying to struggle with how do I develop a team so that I can start going after more grant money and develop more research papers to publish in academic journals in order to hit that sweet spot between research, teaching, and service. And so what I've been struggling with is, okay, I've been reading up on community-based participatory research. Do I need to be an expert in that? Or do I need to search out somebody at UAB that's already an expert in that? The data that we've collected is, for the most part, sitting in an Excel spreadsheet. But a picture is worth 1,000 words. So how can I find somebody that maybe does GIS mapping here at UAB and then give them my data and say, okay, make me some pretty pictures as to where the empty houses are versus the occupied houses. And even going further, now we have the tax data to find out who's paying their tax and who's not. So have you guys started hearing about the land bank that Birmingham has?
Mm-hmm.
So you have this Birmingham land bank to where if somebody hasn't paid the taxes for at least 5 years, then you can send that through the land bank and the city of Birmingham can take ownership of that property. And their intentions are is to maybe either sell that property at auction or offer it to the next door neighbor if the next door neighbor agrees to continue to pay the taxes on the property and take care of it. So these are things that now the city of Birmingham is very interested in what we're doing and say, hey, if this is something that you can roll out to other neighborhoods, this could be something that can have a real impact on the health of not only our neighborhoods, but our city as a whole. Because if people aren't paying tax on, that's lost economic revenue that could be going to fund our schools and things like that. Okay? So we've been doing some service projects in the neighborhood. This image here on the top is an initiative that we had earlier this year for Martin Luther King holiday. It's usually a day of service. So we had several organizations, the National Society of Black Engineers, the Birmingham Change Fund, as well as the Birmingham Urban League Young Professionals. So these people came out, they came to the neighborhood, and they helped us canvass the neighborhood. They walked up and down the streets, and they had a chart, and they started trying to identify the vacant and abandoned properties. It gave us an opportunity to get them involved in the neighborhood, because a lot of these folks have never even been to Enniston. Bush Hills is essentially Enniston. So a lot of people have this image of Enniston being a war zone until they come and they're like, oh wow, this is kind of nice. So going back to what I'm saying as far as the team, if I'm going to develop a team that I can now start doing research on what I'm doing in the community, what does that team look like? And from the research on transactive memory systems, we have this mental model of tasks, what needs to be done, expertise, what knowledge needs to be done in order to complete these tasks, and then who can do it? Who has the knowledge and the capabilities to do it? So for example, who's good at writing grants? I've never actually written a grant. Apart from the CHIA grant that we won, that was the first grant that I've ever got. Okay, it's far cry from the NIH. I mean, the bar was a lot lower than getting an NIH grant. So do I need to spend all of my time trying to be an expert in getting NIH grants and NSF grants or Robert Wood Johnson, or do I find somebody that already has a track record of that and then bring them onto the team? Multi-level analysis, the stuff that I'm doing is nested data. So I need somebody that's good at biostats. I was trained in biostats in my PhD program, like everybody that has, a doctoral level degree, but it's not really my thing. I can do it, but it's not really my thing. So what would take me 3 hours might take somebody that's a biostats person 20 minutes. Okay, so is that the best use of my time? And so now this is what I'm kind of mapping out. What does my transactive memory system need to look like? And not only from my perspective, once I develop this transactive memory system, then I need to make sure that everybody on my team has the same understanding of who knows what and who can do what. And then to fill in the gaps. It's one thing to start filling this in, but you may have gaps. I may know that I need somebody that knows how to do multi-level analysis. This is probably a biostats person, but guess what? I don't know anybody that's a biostats person. So that may be something I need to start asking around or maybe getting CCTS to help with that. Or I know Karen does health disparities, but is she willing and able to engage in some tasks on the team? So this is how we can really kind of start mapping out what your team looks like. Now, think about the teams that you're on right now. Could you fill out this chart for all the people that's on your team? It's a rhetorical question. And this is what I do oftentimes when I'm doing team training I get everybody together, I give them a blank one of these, and individually I say, fill this out for your team. These people that work together every day, guess what happens? Everybody's task, expertise, and people chart is different in some kind of way. So it's very illustrative when you start getting people to actually articulate, oh, I didn't notice what you did. There are people right now, I'll get trophies. There are people right now. I've been at UAB almost 5 years. In my department, they don't know. Right. Are there people in your department you're like, you know what, they have no idea what I do. Or don't you hate it where, somebody gets a grant or something like that, and then you go and congratulate them on the grant, and they're like, yeah, man, I had the hardest time finding somebody with expertise in X. And you're like, you know that's what I do, right? You're like, yeah, man, like, we go to lunch every day, you know what I do? So, it's these transactions, it's actually getting people to talk about what they do, declare their expertise, and defend their expertise is how we can develop a more effective transactive memory system. Now, the research that's been done on transactive memory systems suggests that when teams have a more accurate and complete and shared understanding of this right here, they outperform teams that have an inaccurate, incomplete, or unshared understanding of this right here. So these are the things that, through my relationship with the CCTS, hopefully this fall and maybe next spring, I'm going to start offering more training to actually start bringing teams in and getting them to fill this out and let's talk about it. Oftentimes we put it on the whiteboard. And so actually, after everybody fills out one of these individually, I get them to come to the whiteboard and they fill it out on the whiteboard. And so I've seen a lot of light bulbs go off and a lot of teams' performance increase by using this method. How much time is that?
Sorry,
Oh, that's cool.
20 minutes, 22.
Awesome. All right. So a lot of this is theory-based. I'm not going to get too much into this because your eyes going to start glazing over. What I want to highlight is this idea of TMS operates in 3 primary processes. And it's what we call directory update. Is that what I showed you before on this slide right here? This is what we call a directory. It's a transactive memory directory. Who knows what, who does what. So over time, we have to update our directories because guess what? I may go to a training class. I may take a class. I may learn something new. And so if I learn something new, then my team members need to update their directories as to the new knowledge that I've gained. Or how many of you have been dealing with the same thing for a lot of years? You're just sick of it. You're over it. I had to walk away from my dissertation research for a couple of years. I was just kind of over it. I was sending out the journals and kept getting rejection. I was like, you know what, I'm over it. I'm moving on to something else. So this is not my dissertation research. This is something that I've only focused on the last 2 years. My dissertation research is on conflict. I published more in this area than I did in my previous area. So a lot of people have pegged me as the conflict guy. And sometimes I'm like, yeah, I do conflict, but I'm trying to kind of get away from conflict. And so I need to make sure that I'm updating people's directories. One of my friends, Jessica, I can't remember Jessica's name. She's a researcher here. She's in the Health Disparities Training Program with me. She does smoking cessation research at the dissertation. And I would always call her the smoking lady. She was like, you know what? I'm really trying to get away from this. She's trying to move on to something else right now, but sometimes when people pick you as that person, you're that person. And those are opportunities that are going to come your way. And sometimes you do it because it's easy opportunities, but it may prevent you from moving on to something else. So you have directory updating, you have information allocation. So information allocation means that we have to delegate responsibilities for knowing and remembering expertise in certain areas. Sometimes people don't want to accept responsibilities for expertise in certain areas. You guys ever, it may be outside of a scientific context where you just pull the short straw. It's like, you're it, and you don't want to be it, but all the other domains have been claimed. So sometimes you have to just take what's left over. However, as you bring people onto the team or expand the research team, it may be bring in somebody else that can take on that responsibility. So you want to make sure that in your team, the people who are responsible for certain expertise areas actually want to be an expert in that area and also have the ability. So it's 2 things. You might want to write it down. People have to be willing as well as able to maintain expertise in a particular area. And then retrieval coordination. Retrieval coordination is, Penny may know what I know. She may know that I have the ability to do a certain task. But just because she knows that I have it doesn't mean that she can get it. Right? So again, going back to the example, if Penny and I are having a relationship conflict and she asks me, hey Anthony, I need some help, running this regression analysis. Yeah, Penny, I'm busy. Check with me like 2 weeks. So what good is it that somebody has expertise in your team if you can't access it? What good is it if your husband, knows somebody's birthday, but he won't say your birthday because he's mad? Okay, so retrieval coordination is the extent to which we can actually identify, locate, and actually gain access to the expertise that's stored in the memory of other people. So in this way, we use other people within our teams as an external hard drive. I'll say that again. In transactive memory systems in the teams, we use other people as an external hard drive, to where we don't want to fill up our own computer. We'll store it in somebody else's computer that has storage. My friend Mario back there, I was just talking to him before we started. He's like, dude, my phone is full up. So I gave him my phone. I want him to take a couple pictures. Okay, so that's me using him or him using me as an external hard drive. And that's what we do from an expertise standpoint. All right, so going back to the scientific enterprise, we oftentimes throw the words creativity and innovation around interchangeably. Actually, in the literature, there are differences between creativity and innovation. Creativity is the exchange and combination of divergent or different bits of information between team members that produces something that's both novel and also that's useful. Okay? So it's just the exchange and combination of different pieces of information that creates something new and useful. Okay? It's the generation of a new idea. But guess what? A lot of people have wonderful ideas, but they don't do anything with it. Anybody know people like that? They have a new idea every day, but they never do it. Okay? But the literature shows us that innovation is actually the translation, commercialization, or implementation of a creative idea. Okay? So within our team, there are some people who are more accustomed to generating ideas. There's some people that can come up with a new idea every day. But if you got to depend on them to actually implement it, do something with it, you might be waiting a while. And vice versa, there's some people who are really good at execution, but they struggle coming up with new ideas. Okay? Doesn't make one better than the other, but what it implies is that that's why we have to work together as a team, because some people are more effective on the creativity side, and other people are more effective on the innovation side. Okay? So I'm one of these innovative people. I'm better at creativity than I am at innovation. So I come up with new research ideas all the time, but I found that I need to partner up with other people that can get that idea real. So I have people that I can just I can have an idea, I get them on the phone, I tell them the idea, and then they do their thing, they create the sausage, and the sausage is made. I don't know how the sausage is made, I don't want to know how the sausage is made. But they make the sausage, and it comes out beautiful. Okay, so again, that's how we respect the strengths of people within our team and make sure that we understand what those strengths are and what those weaknesses are. And don't force people to focus on their areas of weakness. Allow them to be great. I say that again. Allow people to be great. And people are great at what their strengths are and not what their weaknesses are. I've already kind of talked about this awareness. Also within our teams, people have to value what you know. So again, it's not enough to know who has what information. And you may know that it's accessible. But sometimes there are people on our team, they have expertise and they're really good at what they do, but you struggle to find out, so why is that relevant to what we're doing? Anybody ever work with really brilliant people, but it just seems like their expertise just doesn't fit with what they're doing? Okay? Now, that's a subjective perception. There are some people within a team where two people may not find a lot of value in somebody's expertise, but two other people may find great value in somebody's expertise. And so if you don't value somebody's expertise, you're not probably going to pass information to them, and you're not going to retrieve information from them. And so these are, again, those things that we have to talk about in teams in order to make sure that everybody understands the value and relevance of people that are. And also costs. So each time we have to go and get information from somebody, it creates a cost. Anybody ever been concerned that if you go to somebody and ask for help, now you owe them something? And so you just assume not even go to them because sometimes people are very, what's the word for? They keep good books. Put it that way. You ask them for 3 things and they feel like, okay, I got 3 favors. that I can call for and Maury, and Maury's gonna give me these 3 pages back. Okay? So oftentimes we count the cost and we assess the risk of actually going to somebody and asking for information. Okay? Oftentimes we ask people for information based on convenience because they sit closely to us or we know that it's easy to get the information from them. They won't turn it down. Something else I want to say about cost. All right. So earlier I talked about this phenomenon of psychological safety. That's another thing that impacts this transactive memory system. How do we create an environment where people feel comfortable admitting their errors? I messed up. Can a person say that without getting their head chewed off? Can a person say that without them being kicked off the team? What about asking for help? Sometimes people will make us feel bad, make us feel ignorant, dumb, stupid, for asking questions. Like, oh my God, like, that was first semester for your people. Like, how do you not know that? So oftentimes we make an assessment as to, is this person going to make me feel bad if I go to them and ask them for expertise? Speaking of, also challenging, questioning, and vetting somebody's expertise. You know, oftentimes, you know, it may be on your CV, everybody else says that you're an expert, but until I personally engage with you, that's the only way that I can really satisfy myself of how deep your expertise goes. It's not personal, but if we're working on something that's very sensitive, I need to know that your expertise is as good as what everybody says it is, and vice versa. And so when people are challenging you, you know, you have to make an assessment. Are they challenging me just to be difficult, or are they really just trying to satisfy themselves that you are the expert in what you say that you are? And so we need to create an environment where these things can happen without, you know, people feeling devalued, without expertise or information being distorted, or somebody discounting the expertise that somebody else has, or people feeling rejected. Well, I'm going to kind of stop right there, and I want to kind of open up the question. Well, we have about 30 minutes left. All right. So I've given you a lot of information. I usually prefer to make this more interactive, but again, I didn't think this was conducive for today because of the size of the group. So, what questions do you have, or what insights that you have? Or better yet, what are you going to do with this information?
Yeah. I think one of the strongest tools, I really like the idea of identifying with your team, the task, expertise, I was just saying. I just think that is such a good starting point because that is a point of confusion. And I think in many of our offices, things are constantly changing. Nothing ever stays the same. There's a new challenge every day, and it's really hard for people to feel settled. I mean, it's hard to feel stable, I guess.
I was thinking the same thing. I like that. I like the idea of having everyone sort of see what the team, what their vision of the team is, and then getting on the dry erase board and really, you know, I was telling them, we want you to come to our office.
Sure.
And just to piggyback off of Karen, just simply knowing what someone does, knowing what the right hand, the left hand knows what the right hand does.
Yeah.
There's so many times that when you're in an office setting, people just don't know what another person does.
Right.
It's so caught up in room.
Right.
And it becomes even more important when you start expanding the research team. So it's not just,
Right.
you know, the lab person, but it's the clinician, it's the community-based person. And so, you know, their expertise may be a lot foreign to the normal team. So as we start expanding the research team and the teams become more interdisciplinary, this is going to become a lot more important.
And I think getting the team together,
Mm-hmm.
you know, even as you expand or across campus or whatever, to meet, we just had a team meeting with people that are all over cross-disciplinary places on campus, and we haven't met in probably 3 or 4 months. So it was really good to get everybody together.
Right. We're at conferences, so most of my co-authors are not in Birmingham. So oftentimes, I just came back from Vancouver at the Academy Management Conference. I had like 4 different research team meetings, but that's the only time that we get a chance to interact face to face. I met a couple of my co-authors for the first time last week face to face. So those things are important because what the literature says that the social relationship that we have lubricates the task-based relationships that we have. So if we can develop friendships or become very cordial, then it makes the task-based things that we do run more effectively and efficiently. Flip side is, and some of the research that I'm doing is that if you're really friendly with people in your environment, people will take liberties with the friendship. And sometimes people find it very difficult to have conflict with people who they have a really strong friendship with. And so again, if I see that you're doing something that's going to compromise patient safety or the university, but you're my friend, will I embarrass you, in the team environment, or do I wait until we get outside the team? But it may be critical when we were in the public space to call you out. And so again, oftentimes people spend more of their resources trying to preserve the relationship versus engaging with the task. So these are things that, again, we need to be conscious of, because most of the stuff happens unconsciously. So we need to be conscious of these things in order to make sure that we're performing well as a team.
Have you ever seen an organization? I have a kind of unique experience. I was here for 12 years. And when I came back just several months ago with Kenny's organization, it was a kind of a stark reality shock to realize, I used to pick up the phone and the faces have all changed. And a lot of what we do has changed also. Have you ever been with an organization or work where what you're describing is very effective, but it's also a longevity thing? With experience, you learn who can do what.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen an organization who had an informatics system that you could query, lab studies, and it would give you a list, or, and drill down to, well, I need hematology, or I need chemistry, and, just kind of thinking would that be a wonderful thing? I know we've got a great internet system, but it's hard to find anything on it.
And so you have some proprietary tools that are context specific.
Yeah.
So we have a tool called ResearchGate where you can search for someone that has expertise in X. So transactive memory. Yeah, my name may come up, but what about the people that has expertise in the field and clinician? So you have the Web of Science and you have PubMed, and a lot of these tools have these search functions where you can search by domain expertise or by a person's name, and it gives you these queries, but across the different silos, I haven't really been finding it. I know there's some researchers at Harvard that are doing some social networks research. They've developed a tool, but I don't know that it's getting widespread use. The question is, will people actually use it? Because oftentimes people actually have to go in and input. You can pull, publications that are in the public space, but outside of that, there are expertise that I have that nobody may know that I have. The stuff I'm doing in the community, nobody knows, from a research standpoint, that I'm actually doing that because I haven't published anything like that. So, and the other thing is, how capable is a person? So can you actually rate somebody's expertise or rate their capabilities in doing the task? LinkedIn is trying to do some of that, right? Like in LinkedIn, people can say, Mari has expertise in public speaking, so you can, and so actually have these nominations. You have 500 friends, 200 of them say you have expertise in X, and you probably have expertise in X, right? So again, there are tools out there, but not one tool that I've seen.
The best thing to do at UAB is still just social networking. Go to the research coordinator training classes or what are they called now?
Little research training program.
Yeah, but going to all these classes for CEs and just meeting people on campus, just our social network.
Yeah.
Attaches us to other people, and some of us who have been here for life. It helps too.
Right. And through those social networks, people say, what? How do you work?
Yeah, you do have personal opinions, but then you do have the authentic opinions that, that person has a lot of knowledge about that, vast knowledge about it. And they may not have any social skills whatsoever, but they have the knowledge.
Right.
I just finished a class a couple weeks ago, but it was a leadership class here at UAB School of Nursing. And we did the Team Steps approach, which is, a pretty interesting program, and it's pretty simplified too. And I don't know that there's anything like that besides going on in the School of Nursing, but if there's any team-based training going on, because they seem to have a whole sort of program, like here is the program. And, it's identifies barriers and identifies tools and it spells them out. It's really, but I think certain institutions are really implementing those programs, and there's so much. It's obviously all the same sort of processes, and team safety, and it's all. different outcomes, but for teamwork and patient safety, and
you know, role conflict, role, you know, definition, all that stuff, so.
And so for me, that's exciting because I've had some conversations with Margie Lee White and Angela Jukla, and I know they told me about team steps.
Yeah,
So now I'm like, this is my laboratory right here. Like,
Right,
the whole
right.
campus is my laboratory. So
Yeah.
they're like, yes, will you please come here and do some research? I'm like,
right.
okay.
Well, it was an online class, and we had to work in a team,
Mhm.
and it was just all online. I mean,
Right.
there were a couple of us in Birmingham, and one in Atlanta, and one in Omaha was my team. And, you know, it was just all via the internet and conference calls and what have you. We did a team paper and a team presentation, actually, so,
Mhm.
through the team steps process.
Right.
So, yeah, cool.
Well, I hope you guys found something that's useful in this. I'm going to be doing a lot more training through the CCTS, so make sure that you just stay abreast of that. And I would love to come to some of your organizations and maybe do some research, do some observations, or actually do some training. So, any other final questions before we get out of here? All right, well, I appreciate your attendance to this.
Thank
and
you.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Don't forget your evaluation forms, please.
Yeah, yeah, she was, but she.
I'm thinking about starting a team session for my team. That's my reason. Because I teach a strategic.
Well, she's already. She's already. No, she did everything in high school, for her certification. And she wants to move from so she'll be very confident.
I'll be there at 4.
Well, actually, tomorrow is primary, so I've got like meeting at 8:30, 9. So I'm going to be in early, so I'm going to try and meet.
If you do, seriously, let me know.
Yeah.
I'll-
After I get done with those, that last meeting, I'll let you down there.
Yeah, that makes sense. No, not really.
Okay, all right.